And we're back with our panel. Peggy Noonan is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a CBS News contributor. Jeffrey Goldberg writes for The Atlantic. Nancy Cordes covers Congress and the Democratic presidential candidates for CBS. And Michael Duffy is the deputy managing editor for Time Magazine. Okay, Peggy, what do we make of... a lot to go here. What do you make of the rallies in the last couple of days, and how much has Donald Trump contributed, or has he not contributed to this at all?
Seeing the past few days, especially last night in Chicago, the disruptions, the yelling, the pushing, the violence surrounding the Donald Trump rally, and inside it, even though he wasn't there, he canceled, he said, for safety reasons. Look, I think there are two big reasons this is happening, and one victim group that hasn't been mentioned. Two reasons it's happening. Trump is cavalier and careless in his references to punch him in the nose. I wish he could punch him in the nose. If you punch him in the nose, I'll pay your bills. That's bad. That's kind of immature. That's not knowing that America is always a country that, when it's gathered in political passions, can start throwing punches. So that's the first part. Second part is there are anti-Trump groups that are opportunistically moving on the fact that he's given them this opening with his wild statements, and they're coming in and they're causing their own havoc, and they're pushing people around. That's not good. And we always have to remember, this is America. You have a right to come together. You have a right to have a rally. You have a right to free speech to gather. It seems to me a forgotten victim group here is the peaceful people who want to go see Donald Trump and, you know, get him unfiltered, get a sense of who he is, decide who they're going to vote for. They must have been frightened last night. They saw people pushing and tearing placards out of each other's hands. It's too bad. I know people who've gone to Trump rallies. They're just curious, normal people and want to get a look at it.
Michael, the Washington Post has a question today. They say, has Donald Trump lit a fire that now can't be contained? What's your sense of that?
Well, John, containment is not a word that anyone would use to describe this election so far, so I don't think we should start expecting it now. I think we all hope so, but I don't think any of us know. And when watching that tape over the weekend, all of the tapes, and there seems to be a new one every couple of hours, I'm reminded of something we all know, which is that we all live in different places now. Blue-minded people live with blue-minded people, and red-minded people live with red, you know, sort of different. And it's odd that we're now decided to come together at Trump rallies. That seems like maybe not the best place to finally have the mixing that the country has needed for 20 years. But that's what's happening, and there are two basically frightened groups of people. One, you know, the Trump supporters are scared of losing their livelihood and aren't really familiar yet fully maybe owning the multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic society we're becoming. And they're concerned about the Second Amendment. And then there's the protesters, who are generally non-white, come from a different part of the country, and are concerned about how will the rhetoric that Donald Trump is spewing help themselves and their kids assimilate. Those are both sets of real, genuine fears, and unfortunately they're being met at these rallies now. And that is a scary combination.
In a volatile pace, Jeffrey, Donald Trump suggested there may be a new meeting place for these two groups, and that's at the Bernie Sanders rallies. He suggested that he's going to possibly send people over to his rally.
That was, you know, I thought maybe we'd be in a de-escalatory phase, but I'm naive. Obviously, this tweet this morning, I didn't read the tweet first. I got an email from a friend of mine in Egypt who told me about the tweet. The "Be careful, Bernie, or my supporters will go to your rallies." And my friend from Egypt said, "Welcome to the Middle East." Because this is the way politics is done in other parts of the world, and we don't like the way politics is done, where people are sending gangs of their supporters to other people's rallies to break them up and make violence. And there is a real fear now that these things are going to escalate. People are meeting at these rallies; they're already volatile. Someone is going to get seriously hurt, and this, among other things, we're not modeling good behavior for the rest of the world that looks to America for a certain level of political maturity.
Well, and Peggy, as Peggy might put it, that would be bad. Because as someone who has gone to a number of Bernie Sanders rallies, they're pretty peaceful affairs. It's kind of like an Eagles concert where everybody knows the words, you know, and they show up ready to sing.
The Dead, but that's fine.
That's, you know, that's a great analogy as well. And they're bringing a lot of their little kids because, you know, these are pretty laid back affairs. So suddenly you've got them clashing with fired up Trump supporters, and that could be kind of an. That's a good one.
We may be losing ourselves in the metaphor. So Jeffrey mentioned, Michael, the de-escalation, which we had seen earlier in the week. There was a debate that looked nothing like the ones that had come before it. Everybody, with John Kasich mentioned that he thought they were all pretending to be him, so nice and so civil. What did you make of that?
Well, a calm before the storm, a feeling that even I think among some of the candidates that together they could not continue down the road that the previous debate had been just out of control. But then they go back to their separate campaign events and people say things they shouldn't say. And Trump followed that with that remarkable line about how Islam hates us, which was within 24 hours of the debate. That was an astonishingly incendiary, reckless thing to say. And I would just add that we're going to need someone who's a lot more sensitive to that kind of way of speaking as a leader, whether you're nominated or not. But it's also a reminder that some Republicans, according to polls, do expect a kind of blunt talk about religion, and they prefer it. And it's just going to be something that we have to live with, I think, with Trump until he decides, for whatever reason, to change the way he's campaigning.
Two quick points on that. The first is that there is regret, I think, on the part of Marco Rubio that he accelerated that process by responding. The other thought I've been having the last couple of days is that I'm wondering who is the senior figure who could straddle all of these. Is it a Colin Powell who needs to come out and simply say, you know what, we simply cannot talk about, for instance, Islam the way we're talking about it in this campaign because this is dangerous for the United States? And I don't know who that figure or who that group of figures is, but there's a kind of a need for it at this point.
I don't know if that person exists, Peggy, because that person would be in the establishment or be branded as such, and that immediately makes them suspect to all of the people who are creating the energy in the party.
It would have to be a person of grave respect who left, right, and middle would listen to, knowing they weren't pursuing an agenda, but they were trying to look out for America. We've torn so many people and institutions down in our country the past few decades. I'm not sure who that person would be. But let me throw a question to you, Mike. Sometimes when Trump says things like, Islam is our enemy, or whatever exactly it is that he said.
Islam hates us.
Islam hates us. Does he know what he's saying? He could say, look, there is a portion of radical jihadist growing Islam which has appealed to young people, which is violent, and they appear to hate us. You can't just say Islam hates us. It's so wackily imprecise. I think he's an intelligent man. Why doesn't he say it the right way? Why does he do it the wrong way?
That's a question you've asked in your column really well. What does he really think? You know, Ben Carson this week, when he endorsed Trump in something I don't think all of us would have predicted, said there are 2 Donald Trumps, and I was thinking, no, there are about 22, or maybe 200.
And then Trump right after said, yes, there are 2 Trumps, and then he said, no, there aren't 2 Trumps. There seem to be 2 Trumps about the question of whether there were 2 Trumps.
Just 4 Trumps.
He gets to sound like a bridge hand. But I think that he's such a salesman. And he's talking now about unifying the party. But I think he's done so much damage with his rhetoric that no matter how many steaks or how much vodka you put on the dais, it's going to be hard to unify the party around him as he continues to roll up these delegates.
I do think it's interesting that Marco Rubio is starting to say that the things that Trump has said are making it more difficult for him to continue to keep his pledge that he will support the nominee. But the problem for him and so many other Republican leaders who are in this situation is, so what does that mean? If you don't support the Republican nominee, does that mean you support Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton? Does that mean you sit it out? Right. And what does that mean for all of your Republican Senate and House candidates and everybody down the ballot in November?
And it's that sense of unpredictability too that they you mentioned the Marco Rubio. Let's watch actually a moment of anguish of Marco Rubio talking about this.
I don't know. I mean, I already talked about the fact that I think Hillary Clinton would be terrible for this country, but the fact that you're even asking me that question, I still, at this moment, continue to intend to support the Republican nominee, but it's getting harder every day.
It's harder every day.
That was a real moment.
Yeah.
This is the question of whether he'll still support Donald Trump.
Right. That seemed like a real moment of, he's ashen. I mean, a real moment of anguish. And I would, based on that, I'm led to believe that he could not, in good conscience, support Donald Trump and not do a Chris Christie.
Because they're all thinking about November and their party, but they're also thinking about their own reputations beyond November. You know, the political life doesn't end in November.
We'd also like to think that they're thinking about their souls, their own souls in America.
About the country. They're trying to figure out what is the best thing to do here. I thought Marco Rubio looked shocked by history. Do you know what I mean? Sort of ashen indeed, and just surprised at how things are turning out.
We're all a little surprised by history at the moment.
Yeah.
Let's now switch to Democratic history. Nancy, what happened in Michigan? How big a deal is it that Sanders beat Clinton?
It certainly put a dent in her inevitability and her desire to shift gears and start focusing on the general election. She's going to have to spend more money than she probably wanted to in these primary states. I think it showed that the issue of trade is bigger than probably even the Clinton campaign thought it was in a manufacturing state like Michigan, and that is really a centerpiece of the Bernie Sanders campaign, that free trade is killing jobs. She also focused in Michigan, as she has in other states, in boosting African American turnout. And it's true, she did very well among African Americans, but not as well as she has in the South, where she really, wins like 90% of African Americans. And there aren't enough African Americans in a state like Michigan to put her over the top.
She lost 30% of African Americans in Michigan, which is a danger point number for her, particularly as these Democratic races go north and to the Midwest and to the West Coast, because the non-white populations in the Democratic base are much smaller there. So Sanders is going to be in a better position moving forward for some of the reasons that Anthony mentioned, that these states are going to be more friendly to a more liberal candidate. And we'll see. Your poll was fascinating because Sanders is ahead in that poll in Illinois, her home state.
I know. What's no home state love? We're all talking about how people are going to win their home states. Not
and the polls had her 20 up in Michigan, and she's still lost by 3 or 4, and she's only up 10 in the Ohio.
I think you also made the point that Sanders lives off the land. I mean, he could go and go and go. I mean, this is not a high cost.
And so we may have gotten to the point this week that actually the Democratic race is beginning to elongate at the moment that we thought it was going to shorten.
Right. Is she really, however, I'm curious, is Mrs. Clinton really scared right now, or is this just a pain in the neck that she's going to have to play out? Is she scared?
I can't speak to her state of mind, but she's clearly an insider in a year that is so favoring outsiders. And when you have Trump and Sanders threatening to sort of throw their outsider support at each other's rallies,
she's also been in this movie before.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget about her experience.
Although, boy, she must be getting sick of it.
I would say she's probably more frustrated than scared. And you're right. She said this week, I've gone all the way to the end before, so I can do it again. But it's clearly not the way that she would hope that this would turn out.
Yeah, not a message of joy having to slog it all the way out to the end. Thanks to all of you.